Hi. Nowadays, you would have heard a lot of stories about how the US will no longer be the predominant force in the world, how the dollar will lose its position, etc., etc. Now, the thing to remember is this, that the narratives always follow what is happening in the markets, and therefore you will always find a nice little story to justify what is happening. So if you go back to 2003 to 2007, that was a time when emerging markets did extremely well, or when the emerging market index went up 3.5 times, India went up 6-7 times, Brazil went up 10 times, whereas the US could not come out of its tech crash and went up just 61% and was nowhere near its 2000 highs even at the end of 2007. So all these stories about how US was over, and the next decade, the next century was going to be the century of India and China. You heard a lot about BRICS, and then it all fell apart. I mean, in the sense that the US began to outperform once again, and that whole 2010 to 2020, that US was performing very well, and all these stories were forgotten. So this January, when I was speaking at a conference, I said that very soon it may be, I mean, we're still watching to see whether that happens, emerging markets will once again begin to outperform the US, and if and when that happens, you will hear those stories again. 2003 to 2007, we heard all these stories that US is over and now it's the decade of the emerging markets. 2010 to 20, when US was performing, those stories were forgotten. You might hear those stories again. And once again, you are hearing all these stories about BRICS and all that. So just be very cognizant what these are, and these are stories. And as far as the currency is concerned, not that easy to dislodge the predominant currency of the world, because let's say you denominate trade in whatever, in the Chinese yuan or the Indian rupee. So anyone accepting that currency will usually accept it only if they are going to buy something from that country to that extent. Only if you're like import and export kind of match. Otherwise, do you really want to be holding these currencies? If you go back 20 years also, the central banks, how much of their reserves they held in dollars was pretty much what it is now, I think around 60% or so. So, stories are one thing and data is another. Some of what you are seeing about trade being denominated in other currencies is just a function of the sanctions relating to the Russia-Ukraine war. I do not think it establishes a trend of de-dollarization. No dominant currency goes out of fashion that quickly. So be very wary of narratives. Always look at actual data.